what rough beast, it's our come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Je dis ce que je pense et je vis comme je veux. Je gagne beaucoup d'argent, mais quand j'en avais peu.
Hello and welcome to What Rough Beast. I'm Virginia Heffernan. On What Rough Beast, we look frankly at the demise of America, of liberal democracy, and we try to ask what might be built from the rubble. It seems right now, God, sorry to the people just listening, but anyone watching, I'm really trying to be both more camera ready and less self-conscious. So I'm just going to try not to look at my face while I talk. Anyway, just now at a local shop, the owner of the shop, whom I know, pulled me aside, and he said he liked Charlie Kirk and watched his videos, and now found himself very afraid to see what, and I'm putting this in quotation marks, Black Lives Matter or the Democrats might do next. So I'm obscuring the details to protect this guy's identity, but wow, he's hardly the first person I've talked to since Kirk's assassination who is afraid. The reverberations of Kirk's murder suggest, to me anyway, that something really has radically changed in how, let's call it the anti-Kirk, maybe Jimmy Kimmel side of the equation, and the pro-Kirk MAGA side of the equation are handling our polity. To some, war even seems to be in the air. That civil war, while invoked often on X, is invoked even more often now. And at least conservatively, we can say that fear is pervasive. This makes sense because terrorist acts are terrifying. I've been reading about what the far-right leaders in Argentina, Hungary, and Italy are saying. They are distressed and very anxious. The far-right MAGA leaders in the U.S., including J.D. Vance and Nick Fuentes and Elon Musk, are fixated on the two assassination attempts on Trump and on the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And Benjamin Netanyahu is equally fixated on the death threats he gets and its recent assassination. And essentially the ambient possibility for MAGA and the far right internationally is that more violence might be imminent. But let's talk about centrists and the Kirk curious, like the shop owner I talked to. And most of all, let's talk about the left and liberals, because that's the audience here. So I'm hearing from you and from my friends and fellow travelers that the Trump administration's effort to crush dissent when it comes to the canonization of Charlie Kirk, that is, if you don't rush to eulogize him, if you quote his actual words, which reveal him as the Christian white nationalist he claimed to be, you face the fate suffered by Jimmy Kimmel at ABC or Karen Attiah at the Washington Post. That means you're essentially fired. This is quite frightening to people in their careers to feel that there is a chilling effect on speech. But then there's the greater, less expressible fear of retaliation, the fear we almost don't want to talk about. So even as the suspect in the assassination, as I've written about in the New Republic and in my Substack, was recognizably a liberal, so he was ardently in favor of guns and sometimes seemed to borrow the memes of the far right, it would be hard to see him as a down the line liberal. He was, according to his mother, left-leaning and espoused pro-gay and pro-trans rights positions. So make of that political orientation what you will. One thing we can say with confidence is the man who shot and killed Charlie Kirk was anti-Kirk. So let's get back to the rest of us. So those of us who disagreed with Kirk on nearly everything, but we're not anti-Kirk in the sense of wanting to deprive him of his life. So we too might feel ourselves in the line of fire because we're afraid of retaliation and an overreaction. And I think we might look a little bit to history, and this is what I've done in my recent Substack, to make some informed guesses about what might come next in this delicate moment. So we might say, and this is what I ask in the Substack, which I can send all of you to. It's virginiaheffernan.substack.com. If you want a comp subscription, no questions asked, please get in touch with me and ask for one. I will sign you up. Otherwise, and in any case, go to virginiaheffernan.substack.com to hear this in more detail. But my question is, what if Kirk's assassination is like 9/11? That's kind of what we all fear. We fear that it will sort of redound to the cause and the cohort of the MAGA cause, of MAGA, and the way that the attacks of 9/11 redounded to the victim of 9/11, namely America, won support for George W. Bush and his jingoistic ideology, and ended in the death of millions in the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan and related wars. So that is one possibility. But I don't think that the assassination of Charlie Kirk, while an extremely effective act of terrorism like 9/11, really bears much resemblance to 9/11. And again, I worked this all out on the Substack, but I also ask us to compare Kirk's assassination to the assassination of Martin Luther King, which did not result in high polling numbers for the president, then Lyndon B. Johnson, who was aligned with Martin Luther King's desegregation and civil rights project. What it did was hurt LBJ in the polling. He was already on his way down, but it got a little bump after King's assassination, and then he went straight down. And also, sadder and more devastating still, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the chief general in the civil rights movement, ended in huge setbacks for civil rights. The very year that King was killed, Richard Nixon was elected. So what we see where the polling numbers for George W. Bush went way up after 9/11, and the polling numbers for LBJ took a short bump and then a hit after the assassination of King, we might then look to the polling numbers of Donald Trump and MAGA. And what's happened after the assassination of Charlie Kirk is that the MAGA numbers have taken a big hit. And among Republicans, especially, so he's down to about 39% in the polls, according to YouGov. As for among Republicans, a huge number of Republicans now think the country is headed in the wrong direction. Only about half of the GOP now see the nation on the right course, and that's down from 70% who approved of the course of the nation in June. And the shift was especially stark after the assassination. That's according to an AP NORC poll. So I just invite you to think about the current fear in the world in the context of this history, that sometimes the sort of cause and cohort of the victim, sometimes when a movement leader is killed, it fortifies the movement. But more often when a movement leader is killed, it is devastating to the movement. So that's something I would ask you to think about, and I'd love for anyone who wants to weigh in on this question on the Substack. Again, virginiaheffernan.substack.com, and please get in touch with me if you need a comp subscription. It is another few bucks a month, and I know you have a lot of subscriptions. Today, we are not talking about Charlie Kirk's assassination. We are talking to Molly McKew about Ukraine. Molly McKew is an expert on the Baltics and on Ukraine, and she's been following the war closely, both from the region and from the United States. And she has a lot to say about this war that we seem to be forgetting, even as it proceeds and expands in devastating ways to Poland, Estonia, and other places in the world. So I find it really important that we remind ourselves what's going on in the world. Not only that, but Molly is a great friend and always extremely astute on these matters. Molly, welcome to What Rough Beast.
Hello, hello.
I am so happy to clap eyes on you. We've known each other.
Sleepy eyes.
Sleepy. I know, we changed our pajama tops this morning.
I did a fresh, clean pajama top.
I like it. I think I can see it. It's clean.
It's greenish, I think. Oh, it's fancy.
Nice. Got some color. We have been friends since the dawn of doom. We met, I think I started to notice you on Twitter, and then we met at PutinCon. Was that 2017, 2018?
Yeah, it must have been 2017. It was a long time ago now.
It was a conference you spoke at. It was a conference where in an undisclosed location, you could only find out first thing in the morning. There were dogs at the entrance to it. And that wasn't just for show, right? Because Vladimir Karamurza and Bill Browder and people and Gary Kasparov, people with bounties on their heads were really in there, really coming in. And maybe you too. You had
I
to.
definitely did not eat or drink anything at that conference, just in case.
Yes.
I brought my own water with me and only touched that.
I remember people would only have Coca-Cola in a can once they heard the hiss from it. Yeah, it was very intense. So how did you end up there? And let's draw a line from then to now. I think I remember, by the way, one other sign of the times is there was like a Zoom or Skype or something address by Alexei Navalny, the late Alexei Navalny thing. Do you remember? I think he Zoomed.
I don't remember that because I was probably backstage for a lot of it, but you're probably right. Gary Kasparov does have a soft spot for a lot of these Russian opposition types that I don't have a soft spot for. And I will not speak ill of the dead, but from the work that I do, which is from the other side of the line, which is from the countries that Russia invades, I don't have a lot of tolerance for Russians that can't condemn Russian imperialism or the way that Russia, invades and kills its neighbors. And Navalny was always particularly crap on that particular topic, as was Nemtsov before him and many of the others. Khodorkovsky, who obviously, as a formerly imprisoned opponent of Putin, has come out and has been a wide funder of all sorts of really interesting work that is great for the region, great for the world in terms of understanding Putin and who he is, has really come around on a lot of this stuff and is learning how to talk about it. And I think he was the first of the non-Gary group after the 2022 full-scale invasion in Ukraine who confronted the others and was sort of like, hey guys, there's this war and we need to be able to talk about it. No one's going to take us seriously. But
That's
been a slow
interesting.
evolution.
So wait, I want to slow down to Khodorkovsky because some of these names, recall the first go round with Trumpcast. We had Bill Browder on the show a lot who came into people's attention, but maybe you can tell us about Khodorkovsky because he is that's a great data point to connect to now.
Well, I mean, Khodorkovsky is interesting in so many aspects of the story, but the short version is in the wild heyday of the 90s, he was one of these guys that emerged as a collector of shares for pennies on the dollar, but built a company called Yukos, which was kind of a more modernish Russian oil extraction firm, and used that to sort of expand his political, cultural, etc. influence in Russia, and started talking about really dangerous topics like flat taxes and other things. But I mean, he does have this amazing personal charisma. And in the early aughts, when he sort of became a thing, he spent a lot of time in DC. He spent a lot of time in European capitals. He had this foundation that he had started that was doing all sorts of interesting small things in Russia at the time. But it just the guy walked into a room and everybody was listening to him, even though he did not speak English at the time. Just a really interesting guy who had a different approach to what the future of Russia could look like and did not come from this Soviet, he was not part of any apparatus of intelligence or security services. He was just kind of a kid who got lucky and made it big. And so there was a point after Putin reined in all the oligarchs, all of these guys who had become dominant in their sectors after the Wild West 90s, and sort of brought them to heel. And a piece of that was arresting Khodorkovsky for some alleged tax charge because he sort of understood that this guy was potentially a political rival. Khodorkovsky spent a decade in prison and was finally released before the Sochi Olympics as part of this opening, quote unquote, of Russia that everybody fell for yet again. And since has been, Khodorkovsky since has been, as a guy who still has some resources externally, obviously, that he had managed to save from Putin's theft, has been funding a lot of investigative journalism work, of organizational work, of a lot of good projects to help try to build a way forward for what Russia could maybe someday be if it stops being the pile of poo that it is right now. So that's sort of Khodorkovsky, and Bill Browder is kind of an adjunct to the story in that in this period where Putin was using especially tax violations as a way to get rid of people who he did not view as playing along in his new rules for oligarchs. And that required getting rid of a lot of the guys in the 90s, of whom Bill Browder was one, who were wild enthusiasts of the great Russian frontier as the last, boon of investment. And so just started making up random charges against all of them. And Browder was a piece of that, as was someone who worked for Browder who died in Russian custody, that being Sergei Magnitsky. Now there's many sort of acts and sanctions protocols named after him because of Browder's work to elevate what happened in this time frame. But it's all sort of like one piece of the big story of, if you give Russia, especially the Russia run by the security state, the benefit of the doubt, they will fucking rip your face off and then put you in prison. And so you can be the guy who's like defending the pre-rip the face off Russia or not. And like, it's painful because every US administration goes through the cycle of coming in and looking at the binder. And they're like, oh, it just makes so much sense. If only we could just convince Russia that they want to be part of whatever our thing is, the West, trade. Like, well, they just need to be, it makes so much more sense for them if they're just with us. And then it will all make sense. And then they waste a bunch of time trying to do that. And then Russia rips our face off. And then they're like, wait, what? Every time, every administration, it's just a different like length of time. And for Trump, it's particularly long because he has this weird thing with Russia, and he has since the 80s. And it's like, you cannot convince this guy that Russia's going to rip your face off someday.
Right. I mean, it seems like America has this like danse macabre, is that the word, with Russia always. So like the left, if you hate America, you love Russia, right? So you're like, if you decide that you thought America was runaway capitalism, you might fall in love with the Soviet Union, or you might become a little American Bolshevik. And now, if you hate America because it's too lib or woke or whatever, you might love Russia because it has no gender freedoms and hates Europe. And it just seems like it's something like it's sort of the negative to. I mean, it's enchanting. Whether you're Bernie Sanders, if you hate America, you love Russia. That's what I think. I think it's a really great place to park your alternative to America, and you get disillusioned with America, and you start thinking Russia might be this other thing, that where you could critique America, where you could escape the chains of America, however you construe them at the time, whether you're on the left or the right. And now we have someone who,
especially for people who view all of those things as really, really white. Like, this is where Russia has a lot of amplification right now, is the great white Christian, air quotes, hope for the future. But it's always kind of been, it's hard to, in your head, leave America and move to like, I don't know, someplace random in Southeast Asia or Africa, because these are like different data points that we don't quite interoperate with unless you spend a lot of time there. But like, for some reason, all of these goons who decide they want to flee America and find a better place can go to Great White Russia and just be like, oh, it's so magical here, we love it.
Yeah.
And it's all stupid lies and nonsense. But, I guess for a lot of people, it is good to go someplace and be the biggest dumb fish in a dumb pond. But
there was, as you point out, the one practical time to go, if you were, at least if you were just out for yourself, was the 90s, was, after the dissolution of the USSR. And then you could just loot and gouge and get what you could. And then Putin clamped down, and you had to, like, those oligarchs had to align with Putin. I mean, if they wanted to continue to make money, right? And they had to give him a nice hefty cut, and thus we get the current oligarchy. And now I'm getting a sense that Trump is like recapitulating this. It's almost as if the Musks and the Thiels and the Bezoses, they were looting and grabbing for the last 20 years. And now they have someone in office who can give them the giant tax breaks and let them continue to loot and make this oligopoly, tech oligopoly. And it looks a lot, to me, it looks a lot like Moscow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to excuse any of what's happening. And certainly I don't love the fact that the tech pros have figured out that they have a complicit, I don't even know what the right word is right now, to allow them to do all of the things they're doing for even less reward for America than before. It is different in the sense that the system that Putin built, every single person in it, and the reason when we have, like, at the beginning of 2022, it was like, oh, we just need to, like, get some of these oligarchs to understand they need to get rid of Putin. And it's like, no,
right.
because the entire system in Russia is Putin. And it's not just that it's Putin, and it's not that someone else couldn't be that thing, but the whole system is built upon everything you have comes from here. Like, there is no independent business. All these are state-owned companies. 70% of the Russian economy is basically still state enterprise and its affiliates and who works for the government. So, like, those are people who have zero interest in the system changing because they're afraid of losing the pieces that they have. But I think that's the essential difference is, yes, there was a point when Putin called in all the oligarchs and sort of read them the new rules, which wasn't just, and you're giving me some money now. It was, you are now fully integrated parts of our state function. And when I tell you you're going to go to Harvard and fund a school and influence the things, you're going to do that. And when I tell you you're going to go to San Francisco and try to get them to like get back whatever park was once used by Russian fur trappers as like who cares? But when I tell you you're going to do these crazy cultural enterprises or like go invest in Facebook when it was new or whatever, they go do those things. And so it's this using them as arms of state power with their own private funds as required is what they do, because everything they have comes from the Russian state, and that is how it operates. And everybody understands the very narrow wedge in which their power and wealth comes from, and that it only works if you're sort of sticking the arch together, right? Like, nobody is going to get out of alignment. So it's, in that sense, it's different. And I don't think it's
that's a good
even
point.
close to being that in the US, but it is not to say that all of these goons don't understand exactly how to exploit this particular president to get what they want, to the great disadvantage of America and its people. And that Trump is happy to provide that for almost anyone who will pay even a very small fee. And it's that sort of base, petty, like New York real estate hustle thing that really just makes me so sad that like this is the supposed American strongman, right? Like, it's not grand corruption. It's not like you're building a system through which you will be able to scam $200 billion plus as Putin has done for yourself. It's this like nickel and dimey, like, where's my 5K? Like, bring the bag of money right into the Oval Office. It's just so pathetic and vision free.
Yeah. Vision
But I
free,
guess that's what there is.
That's what we have. Well, your reference to the efforts, the highly successful efforts of Russians over the last 20 years to get soft power in the US, including, I mean, listeners, like, that was actually surprisingly comprehensive, though brief, explanation of how philanthropy in the US has started to work, just strange Russian commitments and movement of capital in Silicon Valley, at the Ivy League. And you could kind of follow this stuff happening. And that is your area of expertise, is the kind of hybrid warfare, the kind of effort to co-opt hearts and minds here, even before Trump was elected, and it seemed to culminate in the election of Trump in 2016. Maybe it's a big story, but it is also, one of the most fascinating stories of our time. And it's how Russia did this, and how at the same time, if you can take these two, there are still a lot of journalists who seem to be convinced that there was a Russia hoax, right? It's like the story is that Russia got in our heads, it got in the White House, and then they were allowed to expand their empire. There's another story that's like, why is the left so obsessed with Russia? Or why are the former neocons obsessed with Russia? So this was an incredibly successful op, is all I can say.
Yeah, and I think the part that Americans still have a really hard time with, and where people get really stuck, is the understanding of what you hear people who don't actually understand what Russia does and how it operates sort of throw out sometimes, but it's the, operating on both sides, like blah, blah, blah. But the thing in 2016 that we have had to have some reconciliation with, at least some of us, is the purposeful Russian influence, very much hoping, after having made the decision that Donald Trump would be the most effective candidate for their interests, hoping that Trump would win. But the way to achieve that was not just the things that we've seen as exposed in the Mueller report and other bits. It was not just the direct outreach and contact to the Trump administration, the earlier efforts to influence what was happening in the Republican primaries, which is something nobody ever talks about, particularly not Marco Rubio, whose campaign was hacked by the freaking Russians, or Ted Cruz, who was working more directly with the Russians before he got kicked out of the race. Like, there's all these other bits that we sort of just like don't have time to go back to. But the part that I think we haven't, and even people who still want to talk about Trump as being a Russian agent, which I don't think is the way to phrase it, it's how much influence there also was on the left, and not necessarily, people work. It's not necessarily knowing collaboration with. It is the exploitation of our mental state a lot of the time. And if you read some of the Russian doctrine on what they're doing and how they think about it, there's a concept in the Gerasimov papers of, what you want to do is create a permanently operating front through the territory of the enemy, and be able to control the escalation against that line. So who cares if Trump wins or Clinton wins, essentially? You lay bets on both sides of that line because you don't really care who of these people is in charge of America. You care that you can make Americans run up against each other in conflict and rip themselves apart constantly. And I think since 2015, we have been in this cycle of manipulated internal coercion and hostility. And it's not just foreign. Obviously, there is mass domestic efforts in this regard as well at this point. But I think ignoring some of the groundwork that Russia laid and exploited in those earlier cycles, and the amount of effort they put into the psychology behind all of this, which has fractured our information landscape, how we see ourselves, our psychology, our cognitive abilities to see what is good for us. I think we just really haven't dealt with any of that yet. And there's like these elements of it that have become so interesting because the America crazy is sort of bleeding out everywhere now, right? Like everywhere is anti-vaxxers, like everywhere had anti-mask campaigns during COVID because of us, like the weird populist odd stuff, and like God, the poor UK conservatives or Farage guys, who are like constantly a half step behind. And it's like, but we weren't allowed to deport our migrants to Rwanda. How do you get away with it, America? Like, how will we try to do this now? Just like this weird cyclical stuff. And like when it gets to the point where Vladimir Putin is giving a press conference about Ukraine and starts talking about trans bathrooms.
Oh, I know.
You know that everybody is so plugged into the same nonsense goop that they're just like picking at the goop all the time. And I think that's the part that we Americans are absolutely central to, is sort of the amplification of the goop to everyone, whether it be left goop or right goop.
Yep.
And
that's fascinating, right?
How it makes us manipulable by everyone as well. Like everybody is constantly pulling our strings and we're just like happy to let them do it. And like, it is bad here right now. We're like really close to losing everything.
It's almost impossible not to think that there's very schematically a base where economic relations go on, and then a superstructure where like nonsense cultural stuff goes on. And it seems like we're now just nonsense cultural stuff all the way down almost. I mean, I just read something about, how few of the rich, forget about the super rich, but support Trump, right? So they've changed from Rockefeller Republicans who, wanted lower taxes and strong defense to just people who hate Trump and they're willing to pay more taxes, but they're not voting in their interests. Even they are not voting in their interests, let alone what's the matter with Kansas, let alone anyone looking at any bread and butter issue and just saying, like, which of these congressional candidates is going to fix a bridge? It's just, they're not doing that. Instead, you ask someone like, so how do you think we should fix this bridge or maybe address immigration? And they say back to you, lizard people, trans, Kamala Harris is too black, whatever. And so there's just a conversation that tries to be about base issues of our economic interests, and what you get back is some kind of gibberish that it's almost like it sounds like a foreign language because it's something invented on the internet by poltergeists that many of them who started out, the Russians were good at this early. I don't mean that Americans haven't taken it and put their own spin on it and that there wasn't some kind of vaguely organic anti-vax movement here, but we're now just used to living in this strange upside down where the answers to normal questions about where you might vote or where you might move, you get a response that's about chemtrails. Just full stop, like we're living in some kind of sci-fi. Anyway.
Yeah.
You were so early on this that when you start to notice, and influence obviously is your one of your areas of expertise, when you start to realize that you're on the internet and people are really having like a girls versus boys dispute about like who's better, and it's hard to remember now, but there just wasn't that in 2015. You didn't go on the internet and have people say, maybe all girls want to be gang raped. And someone else was like, well, counterpoint, maybe they don't or whatever. And like, this was not a conversation, but then it was. And I feel like, you know what I mean? Come on, you have to know what I mean.
It did start in 2015 with Gamergate, but or 2014.
Yes,
Yeah.
Gamergate, exactly. But then people suddenly looked to you and said, why are we having conversations that are like race war level conversations and some kind of like boys and girls at each other's throats? Like we went from, conversations that subtle conversations about what kind of affirmative action, say, should take place. And everybody agreed that diversity was a goal. Everybody agreed that we wanted, a more equitable union. Some people thought putting this thumb on the scale was maybe not as good as this other thing. And what should EEOC and how should women's wages be treated? And all of a sudden we have like send them to Uganda people in the mix.
Yeah, I think it's maybe just always been there. And I think, we go through these cycles. We're at such a weird point in the cycle. And like people are just inured to how dumb what they're being fed is, right?
Yes,
it's like, why
yes.
why is there trad wives right now? Well,
Right.
it's because they want women out of the workforce because
Yeah.
women are taking things from you. Again,
Right.
whoever the you is. Like, no accident that the new, employment statistics, like what's the group most greatly disadvantaged by all the decisions Trump has made in terms of shutting down the federal government and other things? Black women, the people who didn't vote for him. But who's gotten all those jobs? Like one-to-one replacement, white men, literally the statistics. And it's just like, okay, that looks like what it is. This narrative of the reason you don't have what you want is because somebody has taken it from you, which is fundamentally anti-American. We are not a grievance-driven country.
Right.
We are a make your own way, like
And
find
also,
your opportunity. There's a place
also
for everybody here.
notoriously a forgetful country. Like, remember when we didn't know history, but now we've invented
We still
a history.
don't.
Right. Well, we still don't know history, but there's an invented history where something was stolen from us or something.
Yeah, Trump is really good. And like there was this moment in how he sort of and none of it makes any sense to sane people, but there was this moment recently when he was meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office, and as per usual when they were doing the media spray, there was some, I don't know if it was a Fox News guy or an OAN guy or one of these, right-wing guys, but there's always a journalist who's there, like, who's been given the narrative questions, like ask these questions to force Trump, like pull Trump's little chatty Cathy string so he repeats the talking points that are necessary. And he layered the questions in the way they needed to be done. And, just like the button goes on and suddenly Trump's telling the story about how the missing ballots and the stolen election and the corrupt DC and the need to have like the National Guard are pulling people off the buses for not paying bus fare and the monuments police who are now helping them do this. And all these other things, and like all the missing ballots and all the things sort of wrapped together into the war in Ukraine. And you're just like, what the hell? Because like the war never would have happened. And like, there's just this ability to put all the nonsense into this one ball and have people just hold the ball.
Right.
In the ball is anti-vaxxerism and some element of trad wifing and
mitochondrial issues, serious mitochondrial issues.
The deep fear of men and women's sports. Like,
I know.
I cannot believe half the country has been driven mad by a nonsense topic like this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally like if you made the country lose their minds politically over the idea of eating protein made out of bugs, right? Like it's that obscure.
Yeah.
But this is where we are. And like people just, it's like standard reflexive psychology. You just push the button and people are like, eh. But Trump does it in such an amazing way, and this has become part of the lizard brain, and also then the coordination with the people who are helping him with this. It has become this integrated fabric of narrative of Americanism that is not real. And like this weird shit where the Homeland Security people and the Department of Labor are literally just sort of scrubbing off the Russian and putting new slogans on what was a mid-century Soviet propaganda poster for like recruitment.
Do you have some examples for us? I mean,
there was one that the Department of Labor used, but it's just like, like what's the image? It's like wholesome American white farm boy with his hair and his denim shirt standing in front of, who knows? Is it oil derricks? Is it factory towers? Like, here's the real American. And it's like, there's no factories. Like, whatever nonsense the Republicans are currently trying to spin, which is
Yeah.
like, we need to change the child labor laws so kids can drop out of school and work in the factory and have babies when they're 15. What factory? Like,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
computers
I
are gonna
always think
make
about this.
all the things. Like, you mean
Yes.
the meat packing plant? Like, is that the job you think is the future for Americans?
Right.
Is like
Right.
butchering the animals because now we've deported all the immigrants who previously had these jobs? Like,
Yep.
what are you even talking about?
Yes.
But
Yes. Yes.
it's the core image in there that works so well. And there was a really good article, I think it was in the Atlantic, but about one of these ICE recruitment fairs, and where they're like hiring people right off the floor, and like they
Yeah.
have whatever it is now, 2 weeks of training before they're grabbing people off the streets because they're training them on the job, which is like a good way to make sure nobody understands the law or what they're doing. And it was like talking to the people who were there, and there's, a few people who it's just, of course, they need a job, like but the bonus, $10,000 extra dollars a year over 5 years plus bonuses for arresting people is a big bonus for a lot of people who are in tough financial times, like having job security, et cetera. So, okay, fine. There's a little element of that. But a lot of the people who are there believe the message they're being sold.
Right.
Like, somebody needs to do something about the terrible invaders. And you're just like,
Yep.
what invaders? And
Yes.
then there's the other guys, who are even like weirder about some of this stuff. Or there's like the stories like the Lake and Riley story, whatever, like one story that exists of a person, probably a blonde person, I don't know, who was killed by some illegal, who knows? But there's these things that have just become these propaganda polls that people are referencing, and you're just like, oh my God, everybody's living in this universe. And the
Yep.
weirdest part to me was the subtext of how many people ICE is hiring who are themselves on green cards or immigrants to America, and who like are either people in the pull the ladder up behind me camp, or people who like somehow think they're going to help. Like, well, nobody speaks Hindi, I should be helping so the people who only speak Hindi can. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, they're just going to get deported to Uganda. But it's so interesting looking at that landscape, because they're finding the people who ideologically support this
Yep.
very strange
Yes.
violence that the
That
state is doing.
they didn't support, 3 months ago, and certainly not 4 years ago. I mean, they're not people who grew up as young pioneers, or, Hitler, you like the indoctrination. And I think this is probably part of, again, you can speak to this as a, understanding internet disinformation and propaganda, that it just happens very quickly, and it happens in adulthood. When you hear, like, in that film Chernobyl, that I thought was so good, but when you hear people refer to each other as comrades and mention Lenin, you start to think, like, this is a big operation, and you have to get them young, and you have to indoctrinate them in this massive long-term plan and project that makes people think that what's happening now looks bad, but we're all in lockstep to the rapture, right? And like, there could be either the elevation of the worker, or the coming of the Messiah to the Holy Land. But that this is like, you just think propaganda like that, like they had in the Soviet Union, is a huge operation, right? But here in the US, you can take Ashley Babbitt, who's walking along trying to start a small business, has never cared about politics, and in 6 months, turn her into a martyr for the cause. Like, who's willing to shed blood for what again? Something to do with trans girls in volleyball? Something to do, who knows? And who knows exactly? And what they've said is, so I wonder if this is a new, or if you could say something about this kind of radicalization, where the question that every American has, half Americans have, why did my uncle, who never cared and sold orange juice futures and then retired, why is he every day sending me something about mitochondrial disorders and vitamin K or whatever? So
I mean,
how'd
it's
this
funny because
happen? Yeah.
we always knew these wellness people were the real evil, and like, oh my God, it's just eating our faces now. But leaving that
Yes.
aside, because I can't with the eugenics bros, which is what's happening, and people just need to be real clear that when RFK is talking about mitochondria, he's talking about eugenics. But
He's talking
okay,
about
let's
eugenics.
just leave it. Let's just leave it.
But it might I wanted to see where mitochondria comes from, but anyway,
Mom. It comes from the mom. So that's the thing, is like when there's weak mitochondria, it's the women's fault. See, there you
very
go.
clever. See, they're always thinking. They're always
Thinking.
It was refrigerator moms that used to cause autism. So anyway, as long as it all roads lead to the mom. But the Mengele
It's always the
discourse
moms.
is around jaw size, and they're bringing out the calipers and ranking the races, and then
So
gouging the eyes out of. There's something like there's a lot about, if you look at a child, you can tell if they're of the inferior something, and that is exactly how RFK sounds now. So anyway, the eugenics
yeah, he
the
does.
eugenics conversation, sort of the manosphere, too much concentration on testosterone, on sunning your balls, is going to start to lead into genetics and mitochondria. It just anyway, that has happened. So we're noticing the movement from that to that. But how do people exactly start move so quickly, as you say, the Maha people?
So I think it's interesting, because I think, and the reason it works so well on any of these groups in America,
Yeah.
right? Like in the last decade, Americans have lost their fucking minds. And how did that happen?
Right,
Like
right.
for people who previously just cared about vitamins, or like people who were just like really into the rapture, or how did all these groups converge into one great madness?
Yes.
And I think the problem is, for America always, it's like the thing that is our strength is also our weakness, which is we are this void, right?
Mhm.
Don't know history. There is no national identity that is firm. Mostly what we have has been constructed in the post-World War II period, because what was before was not really that awesome. And
Yeah.
and so we really had to latch on to this period of, we fought bad guys and won, and now we're doing civil rights at home and advancing all the things that we actually believed in. This post-war narrative is where what we think of as Americanness sort of emerged in a very well constructed and purposeful way. And all the bits before, it's like this roller coaster of what is
Yes.
America. And we just kind of leave all that stuff aside. But I think the void of architecture, of understanding who we are, is where there has now been this. And again, sometimes it's what's great about America, because we're not going to war with Canada over a goat that was stolen 200 years ago, like some other countries in the world are constantly doing. We just don't have historical identity in that way that nations that are so linked to thousands of years on the land have. But I think that also makes us highly manipulatable. And in this current genre where things are changing fast, where things are uncertain, where information shows up in front of us because the algorithms put it there, and the Russians put it there, and the Chinese put it there, and Steve Bannon's guys put it there, and whatever weird blue influencers put it there. And we don't really understand how it got there, but it's there, and it's in our faces, and it still works. Our brains still absorb information in the ways that would help with survival, as opposed to whatever we're in now. It's just, we're in this weird period where, unless you are consciously aware of how your brain sees information, processes it, absorbs it, reacts to it, etc., it's just so easy to co-opt you into things that are not awesome. And that is being quite deliberately done towards some groups and accidentally towards others. But I think when you cross the 2015, 2016, 2017 threshold, when it became so apparent how easy this was in America, because our psychology is open. We are looking for things. We are engaged with things. We don't have hardened, fixed views on many issues.
Right.
Everybody just started to try to get in this mess. And what we're left with is nonsense. And the people who have the most self-interest in Americans being out of their minds are the ones who are kind of shaping this whole process. But we are just adrift in the who are we question. And people are latching on to whatever thing. I think, again, it's the genius of Trump. But the two basic truths of politics, of anything, are essentially, people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, particularly people who grow up in democratic societies. And people want to be told what to do. You just it's easier not to make decisions. You want somebody to give you these two things. Do this and you will be something. And this is a thing you are a part of, right? And now Trump, I mean, it's been so long since the nation asked anyone to do anything productive, right? When this guy Trump shows up and tells you the thing to be a part of something greater than yourself is to hate everybody except yourself and your family. Okay, I can do that. Cool. And the core selfishness of how he got reelected, which was really just telling people, you don't have to care about anything but yourself.
Uh-huh.
It
That's
isn't
always a
just.
relief. I mean, I find
I
that
know, right? Just care
that's
about yourself.
that's why I read some little self-care women's manuals, whatever.
Just care about yourself.
Just care about
And
yourself.
it's like, and then people will really fight you when you say this, that what, like, the core of what he was offering people was just this absolutely selfish demeanor that he has thrived from, that the people around him have thrived from, that is now defining everything in DC. Like, just get your little piece while you
Mm,
can. But that's what it is. And it's so fundamentally out of alignment with what has made America work ever, that I think
yeah.
that's the jarring part for the people looking at it as not participants. And it's just what's so funny is, and again, I don't like shitting on all of our media, because, we write, like, we
Yep.
contribute to things.
Yep.
Like, there are people who are fine, but it's not a mystery to anyone in any other country, whether it be China or Russia or our allies, our European peers, countries like Japan that are as wealthy and economically advanced as we are, that are functioning democracies, Korea, Australia,
Mhm.
whatever. It's no mystery to any of these people what's happening in America, but, like, we don't put the words on it. We don't know. Like, it could be just fine. Like, what does it mean when the military is doing domestic policing with, like, very, very unclear rules? Like,
You're right.
what
But
is that?
what do
It's
they
just like,
and so what do they say? How do they read it in South Korea or in Kyiv? I mean, what's the man on the street take of, like, well, then that thing happened in America. What's that thing called?
I mean, the Ukrainians have better things to think about and are not so concerned
Sure.
about what is going on domestically in America. But in general, I think what most of our allies see is a rising slant toward authoritarianism that
Yeah.
Americans are apparently on board with. And plenty of countries have dabbled with this and either toppled in and climbed out, or just narrowly avoided the edge or whatever. We're not the only ones to do it, but I think because of our relatively unique history and the role that we have played in the last 100 years, a little, on and off, like, we're not always the best, but the role that we purposefully built for ourselves, not in winning World War II, but in winning that peace after,
Uh-huh.
of being global police, which I know nobody likes, but that was our job, was being the guarantor of the global architecture of security, that allowed peace and prosperity in many parts of the world, not all, to be more, I don't know, whatever, for that last 80 years. That was the role that we assumed.
Yeah.
And now we've both gone crazy and shown everybody that we're crazy and abandoned that role all at once. And, like, I don't know why Americans think this is going to turn out well for us, but it isn't. And
Yeah.
if you think you're going to be on the ark with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, you're not going to be on the fucking ark. Like,
Oh,
we're all
no.
just the bugs. They're going to, like, churn up into the protein goo. And, like, I'm beside myself at what I see happening in America and how many people who are doing well, like, these are not the, like, I have 6 homes, I'm flying around on a private jet people, but people who are doing well and are not concerned about their finances or their future or their ability to retire, who just, like, don't have time to think about all the things that are happening that will make it certain that no one else ever lived that well again.
Mhm.
I really have a hard time with this.
Yeah. But sometimes I think I'd rather those people be complacent and sort of walking through the world than suddenly, getting ideas about mitochondria and tradwifery, right? Like, you just want to be like, just keep thinking about shopping, the things that you thought about in the 90s and aughts, and just carefully, please thread the needle so you don't get obsessed with mitochondria, because it's not they're going to the barricades, right? So, like, just we hope they think about something normal, banal, instead of normal, insane. I mean, I don't know.
I'm a little worried that none of us are going to the barricades. And look, I put myself on that list, right? But it's just like, having been in countries that were either lost or had to fight to not be lost, or were nearly lost and then had to rebuild. I think we Americans in particular have these really romantic ideas of, God forbid the word resistance these days,
Yeah.
but of resistance, right? And, like,
Yeah.
what that looks like. And, like, living in times that fraught, or in a system where you can easily be defined as the enemy, or where people who are important to you can be taken for absolutely no reason with no recourse in a transparent legal system. I just think, like, Americans are not aware of how fucking horrible it is
Yeah.
to lose the sanity that we have largely lived in. And I understand that is not always a thing for everyone. Plenty of minority groups in this country have not been well represented by the law, and fighting to expand those protections to everyone should be the point of everything we do. Like, I get that, but I don't think Americans, big Americans, one giant ball of everybody the same Americans, are aware of how fucking horrible it is for everybody inside the system when you lose what we're about to lose, because either you are absolutely disposable or you are complicit to fucking atrocities. And these are the two choices. There's no like, I don't know.
Yeah. What you said something that I just have to go back to, that Trump has been weird about Russia since the 80s.
Since the 80s, yeah.
I see kind of interesting analyses that his mind is in the 80s, and it's always in the 80s. Like his decor, his idea of mail order brides, his shoulder pads, there was this heyday for him. And like, who knows, like I've as I get older, I'm sure that I will regress and start wearing, flannel and be like, it is my heyday. It is the 90s again.
There's nothing
right?
wrong with flannel.
There's nothing wrong with the flannel. Exactly. And some Nirvana and Marlboro Reds and whatever. But is talk about being weird about Russia since the 80s, because I think that's super interesting. And I think we're sort of only understanding the narratives that people have with Russia itself in their heads. Americans have a conceit, an imaginary of Russia, and he has a very specific one. So tell us about that.
Well, I think, in the 80s, before the Soviet collapse, there was this sort of opening under Gorbachev, right? But guys like, when there was already exchanges, where guys like Trump, the Western businessmen who were going to get in and change Russia, which included, by the way, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, but we'll just leave that aside too.
Oh, yeah.
But there were all these guys, and it was because it was a closed system, right? It was this like magical place. We didn't know much about what was happening behind the Iron Curtain for a long time, for all the reasons that we know. And it was this sort of like mystery box, a huge, giant fucking mystery box that nobody had been allowed into. And I think a lot of people wanted to get into that. And Trump's view of this is obviously super influenced by being in New York, where there were a gazillion Russian and ex-Soviet expats. It's like he started getting in the circles with the Slavic-y women. Everybody loves the beautiful Slavic women. But anyway, at some point he developed this idea that Russia was this place he needed to be, and started trying to go and make deals, right? And let's make a deal. Like, how do I build something with the name Trump on it here? And since the 80s, when he was clearly identified, and I think there are old intelligence files from whatever place his first wife was from about this, they understood he was like a wealthy-ish American, that he had these circles of influence. Like, this is a guy, like, let's just like pull the strings a little. And what you do is you keep these people on the hook. Like, you're not going to give them the thing. You're not going to give them the deal they want. You just want to keep them on the freaking hook. And that's what they've always done with Trump, whatever the they is, right?
Yeah.
Trump has gone to Russia multiple times. His kids went to Russia multiple times. He had all of these Russians working for him in real estate in the US, selling his condos at various places, who were like, ooh, I know a guy in Moscow who will like help you get the deal. Like, there's just been this, like his whole last 40 years has been this strange orientation toward trying to get some deal with Russia that he's never gotten. And a smart person is like, this is bullshit, and just walks away and makes a deal someplace else. But this has always been this weird thing that he has oriented toward. And I just think the mystique of it, it's like been layered so many times and all the different influences that it's just like a thing he can't get rid of. But the weirdness with Putin is, God, that Alaska meeting. But
yeah. Well,
it's just so like.
So wait, make sense of that and what you
I'm
are.
clapping my little hands for the arrival of a murderous barbarian on American soil. Aside from the fact that it's yucky because murderous barbarian wanted by the ICC, but it's the thing where Trump like wants to be a strongman, but just totally debased him. Like, you don't clap the arrival of another strongman because then you give them primacy above you, right? Like, what do you? Everything about that was just the weirdest shtick. But look, it's just, I actually put up a piece about this yesterday, but it's just this like everything is now the show. Trump builds these confections and we're supposed to look at them and like, ooh, it's like, but like it tastes like shit on the inside, but it looks nice on the outside. But we engage in the show for however many days and then there's a new cycle and then he gets bored and says like, whatever, maybe the war will end, maybe it won't, who cares? And that's the cycle we're back to right now. But it's just like so inherently dangerous for America that this is the leadership we have at this time of great global peril and change. Yeah. And absolutely a fucking travesty because those red carpets are just rolled out over the bodies of Ukrainians who are fighting to keep the rest of us uninvaded. And I just think where we are is real dark, and the simultaneous deconstruction of everything essential to American survival, our universities, our scientific research, our ability to see fact from fiction, our educational system, our health system, whether or not we have representative voting in the future, with the weird stuff happening in our security architecture right now. We're diverting those resources into these propaganda operations inside the United States. Like, it makes sense. Like, you know, not building missiles because we're building freaking detention camps is like a good trade for the American future.
Yeah.
No.
Right. Yeah. He's an unpopular populist, and he's just like a terrible dictator. Like, even just like, there's not one train running on time. There's not one, meaningful accomplishment. It's not just that he's not giving money where we want him to allocate money, but he's squandering a lot of it, right? Like, just,
Americans are going to die, including his voters. Like, a lot of Americans are going to die.
So
we're just going to ignore that, but it's what's going to happen.
I want to hear that. I want to hear that first. And then second, I want to hear, before we go, how things are in Ukraine. I haven't even really followed like how Zelensky responded to the re-election of Donald Trump and how that changed things for him. So tell us about Americans Gonna Die first, and then we'll go to Zelensky.
Well, I mean, it's the levels of peril, right? Like, and I think we're so lucky as Americans to have lived in a largely sane country, and that's never been even. Our federal structure ensures that. But I think the thing we've really taken for granted, and I'm going to tell you, particularly if you live in a red state, you've taken this for granted, is in the last 40 years when there's been this like ultra focus on no new spending and all these states have unfunded their own education and disaster relief and whatever else. And, federal tax dollars, aka money from blue states, has like bailed out that bad state level decision making. Like, all that's gone now. And the lack of protections that now exist for disasters, for health emergencies, the fact that like half the country, our insurance is going to go up to like $10,000 a month premiums next year. Awesome. I'm not going to be able to pay that. That they're cutting, that like the idea that came out of the Depression, that the government has a role and responsibility in ensuring the health, well-being, and security of its people is now just like fully gone, and people think that's good, and I guess, or like don't care yet because it hasn't like affected them yet. But there are no protections left for you. The system that Donald Trump is creating is what you get is what your dollars buy for you. And maybe that works well for you if you're Elon Musk and you don't really care what your insurance is doing for you anyway, or a person who can fly around on a private jet, or a person who does have hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings that can save their kid if a medical crisis emerges.
Also, their superior mitochondria and their
superior mitochondria,
right?
Because obviously your superior mitochondria is why you have more money, which is how modern eugenics works.
That's it. Yeah.
But the system is now going to be, you only have what your money is going to buy for you. And I'm sorry, but that is a rough fucking system for any of us to try to live or thrive in. And I think, so we're just leaving all that aside, I think we're really, like, even leaving out the authoritarian police state shit, like the thing where you have no protections left and no one is looking out for you, and stop electing the fucking people who think that's a good idea, is just like Americans really need to have a come to Jesus on this. So all of that. Ukraine, it's interesting because the Biden people did many things that are worthy of note to support Ukraine and to muster sort of a collective will in defense of Ukraine. But they weren't that great, and they held Ukraine back in many respects. There was the constant pacing of how weapons were delivered, an idea of what the conflict should look like to not be that bad for Russia that the Biden people
Right.
really enforced. And I know they would not say it this way, and people get all up in my grill about it. And okay,
I
fine.
mean, no, just for the record. So, like, you and I have some disagreements about Biden times. We've been friends through all of this, but that's one of those reasonable people can disagree about exactly the strength of Biden's intensity. Now with Trump, we're in a whole different order.
But so I think, during the election, the Ukrainians, they knew what they were going to get from another Biden administration, which was more Jake Sullivan, more Tony Blinken, more Bill Burns, more of this. You can't unbalance the relationship with Russia. Like, there is no imagined different way with Russia than what we have now, which I just disagree with. And it's not to say that their intentions weren't right, that the ultimate endpoint we all want to achieve wasn't the same. It's just there were a lot of things we disagreed with. And for the Ukrainians, what that meant was a lot more dead Ukrainians than there probably needed to be, because the way we made them fight the war was relatively nonsensical, and we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't fight a war with absolutely no air support. We wouldn't fight a war not against our enemy that is launching attacks against us. Like, a lot of the strange rules we were imposing on how the Ukrainians fought, which they had to abide by to survive, it caused a lot more Ukrainian casualties. And there's no debate about that. I'm sorry. And you can say that was still the right way to do it. And a lot of people still defend it. And you'll hear more of it, and it is how they will write their own narrative in history. But I strongly disagree with it, knowing the Ukrainians and what they are capable of, and seeing what they suffered.
It's just a relief to me. Like, your voice drops. We're having a normal conversation where, about how much aid and whether it should be conditioned, and all those conversations that like all of us have had for 40 years and that appear in Foreign Policy magazine. And those are. But they're nutritious conversations, right?
Yes.
There's something to them now.
But so the Ukrainians knew what they were getting from Biden, which was more of this, which was never going to be investment in a theory of Ukrainian victory that would fundamentally change what we're looking at, right? And there was like this, we always have the misplaced hope of the unknown, right? But it was like, maybe we'll get something different from Trump. Like, who knows?
Okay.
It's not that they wanted him to win or lose. Like, they just wanted to kill more Russians. But there wasn't a necessity of despair about a Trump victory. It's just because it was like, who knows? Like, maybe, But obviously that changed pretty rapidly with the appointment of so many desperately unqualified people into critical jobs, of the early engagement, as always, with Russia, of how Trump absorbs and parrots Putin's talking points, like, without understanding that's what they are. Early on, when there was Keith Kellogg, as the Russia and Ukraine envoy, I think this is a normal guy. Like, it's a normal guy. Maybe we don't agree on everything, but it's a normal guy with a lot of experience who understood the Ukrainians and what needed to come out of the war. They were like, okay, we can work with that. And then, of course, Steve Witkoff zoops in and takes over the Russia role. And this guy is just like, it's so easy for the Russians to just yoink this guy's strings. And the fact that he doesn't see it, because, like, I don't even know. He's there on his own dime. He flies on his own plane. He has his own translator. Like, is he even representing the interests of the United States? Like, I'm not really sure. But it's an interesting question. Like, I know we're supposed to be like, oh, he's paying for himself to go and negotiate for Ukraine. Right. But I want my government to do that, not some fucking real estate guy. But he's just not, he doesn't get it. And he doesn't want to learn. He doesn't want to read the briefings. He doesn't want to see the intelligence documents. Because if he read those intelligence documents, what he would see is the Russians are on the phone laughing to each other about Donald Trump, about what the administration is doing for them, about how they are fucking over the Ukrainians, and about how easy it is for them to play this whole system. Because all they need to do is bide for time, and eventually they will exhaust everyone toward the goals they want to achieve.
And how does that register for Zelensky? I mean,
they know they're in a not awesome place. I mean, Ukrainians, in terms of their own morale, their commitment to fighting as long as they have to, that's all still there. Would they rather not fight forever? Sure. That would be amazing. But they know what the alternative to not fighting is, which is Russian occupation, torture, disappearance, your kids being stolen and turned into Russians and then trained to come and fight you. There's no, well, maybe we should just give up. And this whole, like, the way that Witkoff and Trump approach this, like it's some sort of real estate deal, it's not territory. It's millions of Ukrainians that you're abandoning into that fucking occupation machine. And I think that fundamental realization is just one that guys who think about land deals can't puzzle out. And I think, some of these points that you hear from Witkoff, from Trump, as if they're new because they don't, again, understand anything. It's like the interests of Russia that they're still trying to represent as points that must be discussed in some negotiation. It's like the acceptance of Russian cultural supremacy over the idea of Ukrainianness, right? Which is a Russian insistence. They will not pay reparations, aka not accept responsibility for their illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. They want all those frozen assets back. They will not discuss it as a point of negotiation. They will not pay reparations for the 150,000 war crimes they have committed and damage they have done. That's like the framework they insist upon as the baseline. And that's like big deliverables for Russia. And if you are so bad at negotiating with Russia that you are representing their big deliverables as the starting point, then you just already don't understand. And that's where we are. So I think, and the Ukrainians know that, and they're going to do what they can. And I think the show that you saw in response to the Russia show, which was all of the Europeans and Zelensky coming to Washington to flatter, engage, Greece, Trump, to try to move him toward a better understanding of where things need to go. This is the kind of pageantry we're going to have to endure for the remainder of this administration, which it hasn't even been a year.
I know. So just to wrap up, I know,
but the Ukrainians are still doing well, and I want to be clear. Like, they've developed their own weapons. They have long-range strike capabilities. They are constantly targeting Russian oil refineries, which I'm sure ExxonMobil, which is trying to convince Trump that Western companies should go back and invest in Russian oil again, probably isn't very happy about. But I mean, the Ukrainians are doing a lot to make the math what they're going to need it to be as well. But again, all of that would be a lot easier if we stopped treating Ukraine like some sort of laboratory of modern warfare and actually helped them defeat the Russians.
I'm going to leave it there because that's a wonderful period to place at the end of this. Molly, thank you so much for talking to me. It's so good to see you.
I am happy to do so.
Come out of your occupied city of DC and come to our soon-to-be occupied anarchist jurisdiction in New York City, and we can.
Do you have monuments police? I'm sorry, the story about the monuments police guy is like, it's like too much for me. It's too much.
It's just amazing. We do not have monuments police. We don't have so many monuments, but I think we might have more anarchist jurisdictions because we have more of the dread blue hair non-binary people or whatever. So yeah, they're going to really have to bring in the tanks on those 12-year-olds. Molly, thank you. Please come visit.
I'll try. All
right. That's it for today's show. Today's episode of What Rough Beast is dedicated to Karen Attiah. Karen was fired as a columnist at the Washington Post, the Bezos-owned and now right-leaning Washington Post, after she put up social media posts simply quoting Charlie Kirk. Barack Obama has come to her defense, defending her and journalistic freedom. We should also remind people that Karen Attiah was the editor, publisher, and defender of Jamal Khashoggi and has been a stalwart voice for the causes of Khashoggi, for the dangers posed by Saudi Arabia, and for the ongoing cause of civil rights in this country. This episode of What Rough Beast was produced by Richard Stanislaw. Brianna Snyder edited the show, and John Jeremiah Sullivan recorded our theme song, Je dis que je pense et je vis comme je veux, which was originally written and recorded by the French pop star Antoine. Please subscribe to our show at wharoughbeastpod.com and subscribe to my Substack at virginiaheffernan.substack.com. You can get all the podcasts there. I am Virginia Heffernan on behalf of the What Rough Beast team. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on What Rough Beast.